Satisfactory is a game about automation, organization, and efficiency. So naturally I'm going to throw all that into a biomass burner and watch it go up in flames. Today, I'm attempting the insane. Beating Satisfactory using only sushi belts. 1 belts, all items, total chaos. Will it work? Yeah. Am I going to suffer? Yeah. Now, you might be wondering, what exactly is a sushi belt? Simple. It's a conveyor belt that carries one or more type of resource at a time. You might be thinking, oh, that sounds convenient. And that's adorable, because it's not. It's a logistical nightmare for 3 key reasons. First, machines will grab the wrong items and immediately clog. Imagine you're a chef at a high-end restaurant. You ask your sous chef to make the lamb sauce, but they don't.
It's the lamb sauce!
So you go to make the lamb sauce, but you can't move. That's this constructor right now. Second, throughput is painfully limited. If a normal factory is a 6-lane highway, this one's gonna be a 1-way dirt road with rush hour traffic. And third, if I don't perfectly balance my inputs and outputs, everything backs up and grinds to a halt. One wrong move and my entire factory turns into a glorified paperweight. But don't worry, I have solutions. Problem 1, smart splitters. These little beauties will sort the mess and send items where they actually belong, in theory. Problem 2, more belts. If I'm gonna have a 1-way dirt road, then there's no reason that it has to be the only road. Keeping everything balanced will be a nightmare, but that's a problem for future me. And problem 3, the awesome sink. This industrial trash can will eat any excess items, preventing the whole system from seizing up like my grandpa. Now, before we dive into the Sushi Belt mayhem, I had to set up a functional factory first. I spent about 3 hours getting the starter base running, and let me tell you, it's not pretty. But it got me coal power, reasonable access to basic resources, and most importantly, Caterium for AI limiters. That means the training wheels are off. No more normal belts, no more logic, just sushi. Also, I would like to apologize for the video quality at points. I got most of my footage from my live stream and was streaming in a bitrate that was too low to capture the game, apparently. No one in my chat told me, and I could have easily turned up the bitrate, but oh well, we're here now. Let the mayhem begin.
The consumer is responsible for any consequences.
I started setting up the Sushi Belt base that I was going to be working on, but I realized building this without access to blueprints would just be insane, which required me to make steel pipes and beams, so I set that up really quickly at my starter base. Then I spent the next hour designing a few blueprints, which I'll explain briefly. I designed a system of removing items from the belts. This works by using smart splitters that run into mergers on the side. The smart splitters are filtered to take off the exact material I need. I also could take off 2 different types of items within the same blueprint. Then I designed a system for adding the items back into the belts. This one was trickier because I wanted to evenly distribute the incoming items between the belts. So I had to make a 1-to-6 splitter on top of the belts that would then feed the items into the belts. Both of the designs had flaws that I wouldn't discover for many hours. The design for removing items from the lanes prioritized lanes further to the left, so less items would end up being removed from the rightmost lane, which then created a problem when I tried to insert evenly into the belts because the rightmost lane had more items on it. This sometimes caused the lanes to back up, and once it backed up in one spot, it would back up all the way down the line. I used some band-aid solutions when I ran into these problems, knowing that this base was going to be temporary, and I kept it in mind when designing my newer base. So I built this base up to the point where I was making all the basics: iron plates, rods, screws, copper wire, cable, copper sheets, concrete, reinforced plates, rotors, and modular frames. All this was done in 6 lanes of Mark I belts, which meant it was obnoxiously slow. So I did an AFKing session for about 6 hours, just letting this horrible base manifold out. It was awful. At first it's manageable, hopeful even. A smelter here, constructed there, a hint of control, but then you need reinforced plates, smart plating, modular frames, and suddenly one belt's doing the work of 20 and cracking under the pressure, just like I am. At this point, I knew I had to tear it down and start again. I decided that I have steel beams being made. Let's research Mark III belts so that I can use those on the future base. I went AFK again for many hours, and when I came back, I couldn't do it. I couldn't play the game. I went to bed, woke up, tried again the next day. This repeated for a few days. I couldn't do what I needed to proceed. Every time I went to start, there was so much anxiety about what I had to do next and worrying about how this video was going to turn out. This video nagged at me like a thorn in my side. I was worried so much about failing, about getting 80% of the way there and stopping.
3, 2, 1, liftoff. After several pioneers started exhibiting traumatic responses to Ficsit developed mitigation tools recommended by your local therapist. If you feel stressed by this complexity, imagine yourself on the shore of a vast and calm ocean. Breathe in, visualize all the people relying on you. The sea is made of billions of faces, each staring at you with hope and tears in their eyes. Breathe out, feel refreshed and focused on your duties. Ficsit cherishes your innate human abilities.
We see through the window. It is pathetic. Consume more blood. The glass will not shatter. The metal will not bend. The wood will not splinter. Leave.
Ficsit is counting on you.
The base has been further expanded, and now it produces steel beams, steel pipes, stators, motors, and encased industrial beams. I set up automated space parts as well, even though I know it doesn't use the Sushi Belt, because I realized to fully see the potential of this base, I needed to start one final time anew, and this time it was going to be different. Before we get carried away talking about the new base, I need to talk about the final preparations that I made so I could begin building. I set up some SAM mining because I wanted to expand the dimensional storage functionality. I also went and did some exploring. Now, to the untrained eye, this might look like cheating. I, however, have beaten the game 3 separate times legitimately and find that running around the map, collecting grimace balls, rainbow slugs, and Cheez-Its isn't really interesting to me anymore. If you feel that cheapens the experience, I don't care. This is my playthrough of the game, and I'll do whatever I see fit to make it enjoyable for myself. If you disagree, you can write a passionate comment detailing every single reason why you think this is wrong and how I'm a bad person, and put it down in the comment section so that I can ignore it.
Very efficient. Also, rude.
Either way, in the background, I'll slowly complete the dimensional storage before we get to the new base. Okay, it's now time for Phase 3. There are moments I just sit there, staring at the chaos, not clicking, not breathing, just absorbing the pure entropy of it all. Why isn't it working? Because nothing is. Because I'm not working. And yet, it keeps moving. Somehow. So I do too. In Phase 3, I quickly set up a rubber and plastic factory, just with the idea of allowing me to complete all the important milestones. Unfortunately, I'm going to need to unlock all of the milestones in this phase in order to progress. Thankfully, that actually isn't too complicated. I first unlock petroleum power so I can throw away excess heavy oil. I set up a quick and dirty turbo-based power plant, which is going to provide enough power for me to kickstart the real base. Then I researched industrial manufacturing, which allows me to quickly set up a single manufacturer making computers. I will eventually need some for railway signals and for the Blueprint Mark II. I also set up a heavy modular frame plant. I'll need this for some minor things to come. I don't need that many of them right now. Now I do know that all of these were developed off of the Sushi Belt, and I was ashamed about that partly. While my base could have made heavy modular frames, it would have just been incredibly slow. There weren't enough materials at the end of the belts. I would have had to turn some machines off. It would have been a real hassle. As for computers, I didn't feel like running oil across the entire map yet without trains. So I made an exception for this, just like I did for my industrial beam production that I made at my first base. This one actually didn't end up being temporary. I didn't know how many beams I was going to need, but I figured it was going to be in the range of 10 to 40,000. So I set this up so that it could always be running in the background while I get my new base set up, which I think it's time we talk about. The plans for the new base are simple enough. I did some rough math and figured that I'd need about 24 belts worth of resources being brought in to produce everything I would need at a reasonable rate. So I was going to have to make a 24-lane Sushi Belt using MK4 belts, which would allow me to transport around 11,500 items into the base per minute. I was going to bring those items in on a train network and mix them all up from there. Then I'd sushiify those 24 belts using a method similar to what was done before to pull off items and add new ones onto the belts. I knew I was going to be using the pure recipes for all raw resources, so I didn't have to transport as much in. This meant I wanted to be near water, so I set up on the western shoreline. This should be simple enough. Finally, progress feels earned. Not because I conquered the game, but because I've endured it. Every setback, every belt jam, every missed smart splitter configuration, every miscalculation, and I'm still here.
Choo-choo mother.
Hope instilled, no longer scared of the mountain of a task left ahead of me, no longer paralyzed by my fear of this video being a disappointment to myself. It was time to lay out my 24 belt sushi disaster and get to work. Instantly, 24 belts don't fit nicely into the blueprint Mark II. So I settled on 20 belts. This means I was inevitably going to lose my ability to make some items quickly, which was going to be a mistake in the long run, but that's okay. Also, fun fact, I really like 24 belts because that's a number that's divisible by 3. It's also divisible by 3 after it's been divided by 2. That means that splitting and merging evenly into 24 belts is really easy. 20, on the other hand, is awful. 20's prime factors are 2, 2, and 5. Explaining how to break down 20 belts evenly and sushificate them is beyond me. I spent an hour or so on stream trying to figure it out. It was breaking me. Thankfully, I realized if I treat the belts as 4 separate lines, I can just do 5 to 5 balancing and then 4 to 4 balancing, thus making it so that each belt is balanced and sushied. Now, I'm not going to go through the finer details of this. I'm sure someone smarter than me has already explained this process.
Adjusting Pioneer Attitude Metrics.
One thing I need to explain about this base is because of its structure, every single mistake is going to compound and be irreversible because of the nature of sushi belts. I can't just run more belts either because then I have to redo my balancing. So the fact that I'm missing out on 4 belts is truly going to cost me more than I realize at this point in time. After getting through creating my blueprints, I lay down all the train stations that I'm going to need to bring in various resources in various amounts. I do forget about nitrogen gas until way later in the playthrough, so an extra station will pop up at the end of the line later. This is where I already make another mistake that's going to haunt me for the rest of this run. I build an incoming track for my trains that all run through the same track, which later ends up causing some fun traffic jams, but it really doesn't occur until all the trains are placed down, so it's only at the end of the run. With a little bit more planning, I could have separated the input paths. Funnily enough, it has problems because the input line is a vertical drop, which creates a lot of speed for the trains, and they can't stop on a dime, so one at the top have to wait for the path to be clear all the way down the line, which wouldn't have been a problem except those that don't come in from the top see an open lane and just take it. Now, I probably could have solved this in some clever way, but again, I'm not smart enough for that. From there, I run my belts together and use my blueprints to start laying out intricate belt weaving that's going to be going on. Then I lay down a bunch of assemblers, refineries, all with the goal of making turbo fuel because this base is going to need a lot of power. Something that I did learn from the past is that the first thing should be built are things that takes items off the belt and then put the least amount of items back on the belts. So for example, my turbo fuel plant takes a belt of coal and a belt of sulfur off of the belts, turns that into 1,000 turbo fuel per minute, which I then burn. I don't need the polymer resin that this process produces, so I throw that straight into a sink, burn the turbo fuel for power, and from there I've removed 2 belts worth of items, which will cause less problems down the line. Everything I just explained to you took about 10 hours of real time getting all this set up. While we're talking about trains, let's talk about train conditions. I set trains to pick up while they are full or have been waiting for 3 minutes. I use 3 minutes because it's long enough to keep it from clogging the tracks while also allowing it to fill most of its inventory spaces. On drop-off, I leave it to the default settings. I also run multiple trains per station, as I need one train per 6 minutes of travel each train does for efficiency reason. Now, I didn't actually do the math on any of this because that would require me timing my trains. Instead, I just winged it and it worked out well enough. Something I'm not going to be bringing up again either, but is really annoying, is that every time I want to expand the factory, I have to expand the belt line. The most important thing about this factory is that it never stops flowing, which means anything that gets to the end of the line has to be sunk. Which means that every time I move a belt line, I have to move the sinks. This wouldn't be a problem except for the fact that sinks are massive. With some creativity, I can find a way to get 8 of them into one blueprint, but I don't figure that out till much later. Then I have to reroute 20 belts, disconnect those belts, get your inventory filled with junk that you then have to throw away. Needless to say, expanding the Sushi Belt is a massive slog. Now that I've complained about it, I won't bring it up again, but just keep that in mind. I found myself enjoying the game and the prospect of making this video once again. Is building a sushi base in a factory game shifting my perspective on life? Have I grown as a person because of this?
Perhaps you will understand once you finish project assembly.
From starting Phase 4 to the end of this run will only take me another 13 hours. 3 of those hours are going to be AFKing waiting for parts to assemble, which means we're really going to fly here. Having everything I could possibly need on a belt and having done all the planning ahead of time means I just have to lay it all down. It starts with aluminum. I already have bauxite on the belts because I set up a train while waiting for parts to assemble to complete Phase 3. For alumina solution, I actually use the base recipe, that way I can store the silica and the excess just goes onto the belt. I know I'm missing out on extra alumina, but I already have more than I need. Then I refine that into aluminum scrap, routing the byproduct water back into the alumina solution production, which has the exact amount of water that it needs to run at 100%, which means there will never be a backup on water. I use the pure aluminum recipe to make the ingots because I don't want to bother getting that much silica, and this is simpler. This setup is making 720 ingots per minute, which I'm tossing into 360 sheets and 240 casings a minute. After this, I'm able to set up radio control units and supercomputers, which are notably going to be produced relatively slowly. This is where my mistakes from earlier are really going to start to compound. While I wait for those slowly to produce and for resources that they are missing to manifold out, I set up electromagnetic control rods and electromagnetic field generators. Afterwards, I spend about an hour doing anything but actually progressing the base. It's that overwhelming feel of complexity and I don't know what to do and I'm scared to make the next step that just leads me to jumping around and finding any small thing I can fix up. When I decide it's time to progress, I quickly set up assembly director production and instantly follow up with heatsink production. Next, I need to set up cooling systems and fused frames, both of which require nitrogen gas. Thankfully, again, while waiting on Phase 3 to complete, I already set up a train line and a train station for it. I just had to wait for the completion of the advanced aluminum production to actually be able to extract it. Once I have, it's actually really simple to set up. The only thing I didn't remember and had to keep in mind is that trains can't move as much gas as they can fluids. It just meant I needed to run a few extra trains though. I get turbo motor production set up before I'm able to unlock them, and this is going to be the slowest part of my base. Note to future pioneers, I spent about 6 hours waiting on turbo motors, so you should probably make more than one machine's worth of production. Only 3 things were left to make at this phase of the game: thermal propulsion rockets, pressurized cubes, and nuclear pasta, all of which went up pretty easy. I had a bunch of copper already set aside and the machines already set up to make copper powder down on floor 1, so it was just a matter of finally giving the machines a recipe and oh god, what have I done? Literally none of this is right. The copper is hooked up to the output lines and not the input. Not all the copper is hooked up. I also horribly messed up the ratio. I laid down 20 constructors for copper powder and each one eats 300 a minute, so that would have been 6,000 ingots per minute, which I clearly don't have. I poorly set up some sort of balancing system that I'm not even sure works and run the 6 constructors I can. This thankfully ends up being more than enough to supply 3 particle accelerators, but what even was that?
We do not resonate with the tribute song. Do not worship at the window. Desecrate our temple gifts. This shallow serenade is sour and salt.
And that's everything needed to slowly complete Phase 4. While we wait, having experience with this game, I know that I'm going to need more power for the final phase. I like to have around 70,000 megawatts per minute, as that tends to be where my base's max power consumption usually ends up being. With this base never resting, I'm going to want all the power I can get. I don't particularly want to throw uranium onto my sushi belts. While it would be funny, I'm already producing 1,000 turbo fuel per minute, so let's just convert that into rocket fuel. 1,600 rocket fuel per minute is what I can get out of my turbo fuel, and it just happens to be essentially free. Rocket fuel takes turbo fuel and nitric acid. Nitric acid is made from a trickle of iron and water with a lot of nitrogen gas. My base already has a massive amount of excess nitrogen because I planned for this, so as I said, it's essentially free. The actual problem is that I'm going to need to build 192 fuel powered generators with 2 power shards each. I easily have the power shards because of all of that exploring that I've done. This, however, eats heavily into my motor supply, which is what ends up making my turbo motor production take forever. Looking back, deleting 2 industrial storage containers worth of motors about 50 hours ago is haunting me now. This base is so punishing, every single mistake stacks up. Every moment that wasn't planned out precisely leads to a multi-hour setback. Since there is no expanding on the base, the best I can do is help with sloop. That being said, while I've been exploring, I'm not going to take that to its extremes to do anything completely unfair, as having infinite sloops would give me infinite power, which means I could sloop everything. I don't actually ever end up using more than 50 sloops, so as to not ruin the experience for myself. Anywho, with all that set up and power running at a semi-consistent 95,000 megawatts per minute, Phase 5 is ready for us. I stop for a moment and take in the sights. No panicking, no tweaking, just watching. And I feel it. Not pride exactly, not joy, but something quieter, something stronger. Control. For the first time in this whole mess, I don't feel like I'm fighting the factory. I feel like I built it, like I belong here. I know that feeling won't last, but for now, just for a moment, it works, and so do I.
You are performing exactly as expected.
Phase 5 is always the victory lap of this game. The production lines are simple enough, dark matter's the only byproduct that needs to be balanced, and you typically don't need things running for very long, so you can just use fluid buffers and empty them once or twice. This also happens to be the phase where I got the most support. My Twitch chat was there hyping me up at the end of the run. And while I'm a small Twitch and YouTube presence, none of that matters to me. Somewhere in this world there are people who believe in me and are at least interested in what I'm doing. If it weren't for those people, I'd have no purpose, and without purpose, who is anyone? Okay, let's finish this. In Phase 3, I have a surplus of Caterium ingots on the belt, knowing I'd use them for Ficsit ingots and Ficsit trigons. Next, I needed diamonds. The Sushi Belt has a pitiful amount of coal on it, so I used the pink diamond recipe to squeeze out what few I can. Then I just happen to have an entire extra Mark II pipe of oil laying around, and feeding that into particle accelerators, I can make oil-based diamonds. I barely need any diamonds for time crystals, which is the next thing I set up, along with biochemical sculptors. Following that, I set up dark matter crystals and one quantum encoder making superposition oscillators, so that I can get the final milestone I need. The biggest problem I'm running into is that quantum encoders take 20 turbo motors, and the last 2 milestones take 450 motors total. This is why I end up spending so much time waiting around for turbo motors. So while I wait, I expand the Sushi Belt all the way to the end of the line, preparing to remove and add all items I have left. This means I get to set up the final 20 sinks of the run, which is exciting. Next, I set up neural quantum processors and AI expansion servers. Then I get bored while waiting for turbo motors to finally finish up, so I made a pixel art Mario. I've never done anything like this in this game before. It was entertaining. Then I'm finally able to set up the manufacturer making singularity cells and another making ballistic warp drives, and now it just becomes a waiting game. Satisfactory, a game about efficiency, but sometimes it's okay to be inefficient, to be overwhelmed, to build something stupid, watch it break, and fix it all the same. Not because it's optimal, but because it's yours. So how hard was beating Satisfactory with only Sushi Belts? Honestly, it was not that bad. The hardest part wasn't the belts, or the routing, or fixing bottlenecks. It was how every mistake, every tiny miscalculation stacked on top of the last, until fixing it felt more exhausting than starting over. This factory wasn't just inefficient, it was fragile, it was frustrating, and it was mine. This run took me about 80 hours, and somewhere in all that chaos I learned more about Sushi Belts than any human being ever should. But I also learned a lot about myself. Because this run stopped being about the game a long time ago. It became about pushing through when everything felt broken. About sitting with my own anxieties long enough to realize they didn't have to stop me. About building something messy and complicated and imperfect, and learning to be proud of it anyways. And the truth is, I think the hardest part of making videos for me is being afraid that I'll be disappointed with the final product. That I'll put time and effort into something and it still won't be good enough for me. But as I finish writing this, I don't feel that way. I think I'm just proud. Really proud. So thank you for watching this far into the video, for your support, for believing in me even on days when I don't. I honestly don't know where I'd be without you.